Even today, sitting on the porch of my old home in Connecticut, I still jolt awake in my rocking chair when the autumn wind cuts through the dry oak leaves with that high-pitched, mournful shriek. My hand instinctively claws at the empty air, grasping for a sweat-slicked control stick that isn't there. My feet stomp down, trying to correct a yaw that doesn't exist. That sound isn't the wind. That is the whistle of death. History books will tell you we shot down over 2,000 Japanese aircraft in the Pacific War, achieving a staggering 11-to-1 kill ratio. They call it a great victory, an industrial miracle. But in the suffocatingly humid spring of 1943, in the cursed skies over the Solomon Islands, those numbers meant absolutely nothing. To us boys of Marine Fighter Squadron 124, VMF 124, that monster with the inverted gull wings and the ridiculously long nose was more than just an airplane. It was our salvation, it was our coffin, and to the Japanese, it was undeniably death itself. My name is Jack O'Malley, U.S. Marine Corps Colonel, retired. Before I die, I want to tell you the real story of the F4U Corsair, not as a polished exhibit in a museum, but as a grease-stained metal beast roaring through the heavens, the machine that dragged us, through blood and fire, out of the terror imposed by the Zero. To understand what the F4U meant, you first have to understand the hell we lived through before it arrived. In 1942, the Pacific sky belonged to the Japanese. That might sound harsh, but it's the truth. Back then, I was flying the F4F Wildcat. It was a sturdy plane, built like a beer barrel. The Grumman Iron Works would get you home, no doubt about that. But in those days, every takeoff felt like signing your last will and testament. I remember the months after Midway. We had won a strategic victory, sure, but on a tactical level, every dogfight was a nightmare. The Japanese Mitsubishi, a 6M0, that damn thing defied the laws of physics. It was light as paper with a turning radius so tight it was terrifying. While you were still wrestling the stick trying to bank, the Zero would already be ghosting onto your 6, your dead rear, turning you into a sieve with its 20mm cannons. In those days, the radio was filled with the desperate screams of new pilots. "I can't shake him. God, he's turned inside me. He's right on my tail." Then silence, or the static-filled crackle of an explosion. That fear spread like a plague through the mess hall. We were told, never dogfight a Zero. It was like telling a boxer, get in the ring, but don't throw a punch. We felt stifled, powerless. The thatch-weave tactic allowed us to survive, barely, but we were playing defense. We were taking a beating. We needed a hammer, not a shield. We needed something that could strike bone-deep terror into those arrogant Japanese pilots, men who thought themselves samurai of the emperor, who viewed the sky as their own backyard. Then the rumors started. Some said Vought had built a monster. Some said it carried an engine meant for a bomber. Some said it was so fast the wings would tear off. It wasn't until late autumn of 1942, when I first saw the raw airframe at a base on the East Coast, that I realized all the rumors had underestimated it. The morning was thick with fog, and a row of canvas-draped leviathans sat on the tarmac. When the ground crew pulled back the tarps, I sucked in a cold breath. It was hideous, and it was beautiful. The first thing that hit you was that massive propeller, a 3-bladed Hamilton Standard, over 13 feet in diameter. To keep that giant meat cleaver from chopping up the runway, the designers had to bend the wings. They dipped low at the root, then swept upward and out. It didn't look like a machine made by men. It looked like a prehistoric bird of prey, crouched and ready to pounce. "Look at that damn schnoz," my wingman, Cowboy Hank from Texas, whispered. "Can you even see out of that cockpit?" Indeed, the nose of the F4U was absurdly long. That was to accommodate the heart of the beast, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, 2,000 horsepower. In those days, stuffing 2,000 horses into a single-seat fighter was insanity. That was an engine meant for a B-26 bomber. When we climbed into the cockpit, the problems became obvious. The early F4U had a birdcage canopy, and visibility was terrible. Taxiing behind that massive nose, you were essentially blind. You had to weave the nose left and right, S-turns, just to see the runway. "This thing's gonna kill us," Hank said, pale-faced, climbing out after his first test flight. "It bounces like a rubber ball on landing." The Navy hated it initially. The carrier landing trials were a disaster. The stiff landing gear combined with the blind spot caused by the long nose made deck landings prone to accidents. The guys in the white uniforms shook their heads and kicked it over to us, the Marines. "Give it to the jarheads. They fly from dirt strips anyway." They thought they were handing us a pile of scrap. That was the moment the F4U earned its first nickname, the Ensign Eliminator. But I remember the moment I first pushed the throttle to the firewall. The R2800 didn't make the dull roar of a wildcat. It made a sound like the sky tearing apart. When you accelerated, the torque was so massive it tried to flip the plane over. You had to stomp on the right rudder with everything you had. Then, you left the ground. The speed. Good God. In the Wildcat, you felt like you were pushing the plane. In the F4U, you felt like the engine was dragging you, and you were just holding on to its tail for dear life. 400 miles per hour? Easy. That relentless power made me realize this wasn't a dance partner for the Zero. This was a sledgehammer designed to smash the ballroom to pieces. Kenneth Walsh, our squadron's technical sergeant and the man who would become the first Corsair ace, looked at the plane with a strange glint in his eye. "O'Malley," he said, patting that massive wing, "if we're gonna win, it's gonna be with this ugly bastard. We don't need to learn how to fly graceful. We need to learn how to fly brutal." On February 12, 1943, VMF 124 arrived at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. From the moment I stepped off the transport, I could smell it: rotting mud, aviation fuel, moldy canvas, and the faint, sweet stench of death. This was the home of the legendary Cactus Air Force. Our Corsairs drew a crowd the moment we touched down. The old hands, still flying F4F Wildcats and P-39 Airacobras, looked at our massive birds with a mix of skepticism and jealousy. "What is that? Somebody break the wings?" a bearded pilot jeered. "It's called a Corsair," I replied, trying to sound confident. "It's here to end the Zero." The man spat. "Just don't let it end you first, rookie. The Japs here don't play by the book." Reality gave us a brutal wake-up call very quickly. Though we had trained stateside, the actual theater of war was another world. The humidity here grew mold on your instrument panel overnight. Rats would chew through your wiring. And we were facing the elite of the Japanese Naval Air Service, veterans who had been fighting here for 6 months. The day after we arrived, we flew into what became known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. It was an escort mission covering PB-4Y bombers hitting Kahili Airfield on Bougainville. Intel said there were about 50 Zeros. That day, I was flying formation with Walsh. When you sit in a Corsair cockpit, watching the altimeter climb to 20,000 feet, you get a false sense of invincibility. The engine hums smoothly. Those giant wings slice the clouds. It feels magnificent. Then the Japanese arrived. They didn't come from the front or the rear. They rained down from above. It was one of the Zero's deadliest tactics. "Bandits! 12 o'clock high!" a panicked voice screamed over the radio. I looked up, and silver specks were growing rapidly. Zeros. It was my first time seeing the legendary killers with my own eyes. They looked so fragile, so slender, but in skilled hands, they were surgical instruments. Our instinct, a bad habit from the Wildcat days, was to turn into them, to get the nose around for a dogfight. It was a fatal mistake. I watched 2 Corsairs try to follow Zeros into a hard turn. If this were a car race, the F4U was a muscle car, and the Zero was a go-kart. In a low-speed horizontal turn, the F4U was as clumsy as an elephant. In an instant, the Zeros cut inside the Corsair's turn circles. Tracers whipped like fiery lashes across the big blue wings. One Corsair began spewing black smoke, tumbling toward the sea. The other had its wings sheared clean off. "Don't turn with them, don't turn," Walsh roared over the radio. "Dive, use your speed." I was terrified. Truly, the fear soaked my flight suit like ice water. A Zero had latched onto me. I saw the muzzle flashes twinkling on the leading edge of his wings in my mirror. I slammed the throttle forward, instinctively wanting to pull back and climb. No, that was suicide. I remembered Walsh's words. "Push the stick, dive." I shoved the stick forward. The heavy nose of the F4U dropped instantly toward the ocean. Negative G's lifted me out of my seat against the harness. The engine screamed. This was the Corsair's secret weapon. During that dive, I watched the airspeed indicator dance frantically. 350, 400, 450 miles per hour. The airframe shuddered violently, but it felt solid as a rock. I glanced back. The Zero? It was getting smaller. He couldn't catch me. The lightweight Zero lacked the structural integrity for a high-speed dive, and its control surfaces stiffened up like concrete. If he tried to follow me down at this speed, his plane would disintegrate in midair. I bottomed out at sea level and hauled back on the stick. Carrying massive momentum, the F4U rocketed back up like a missile. When I reached altitude again, the Zero was still down below, looking for me. We took heavy losses that day. We lost 2 F4Us, 2 P40S, 2 PB4Ys. It was a disaster. That night, in the stifling heat of the tent, the mood was suffocating. Men were crying. Others were silently cleaning their sidearms. We thought we had brought invincible machines to save the world, and the Japanese had shot us down like turkeys. "This plane is garbage," a young lieutenant shouted, throwing his helmet at the dirt floor. "It can't turn with a Zero. We can't fight them." That was when Kenneth Walsh stood up. His face was smeared with oil, but his eyes were cold iron. "It's not the plane," he said, scanning the room. "It's us flying like idiots." He walked to the chalkboard and drew a steep, vertical curve. "Listen, forget everything flight school taught you about dogfighting. Forget the Wildcat. The Corsair isn't made to waltz with the Japanese." He pointed at the curve. "We have 2,000 horsepower. We have armor. We have 6.50 caliber machine guns. We do one thing. We climb higher than them, and we dive faster than them. If they want to turn, let them turn. We don't play their game. We dive, fire a short burst, and use that speed to zoom back up to altitude. If you miss, don't look back. Keep going up, reset, and do it again." "This is a game of energy," Walsh's voice echoed in the tent. "As long as we keep our speed, as long as we don't get dragged into a slow dance, the Japanese can't touch us. Their Zeros are made of paper. One touch from our 50s, and they're finished." That night, those words replayed in my mind. This was the core of the famous boom and zoom tactic. It wasn't new, but the F4U was the first machine capable of perfecting it. Weeks later, in April, we went up again, this time over the Russell Islands. This time, I was different. The F4U was different. Or rather, we were finally one. There were about 16 of us, patrolling at 25,000 feet. That altitude was uncomfortable for the Zeros. Their engines lost performance up high, but our double Wasps, fed by 2-stage superchargers, were still breathing fire. Bogies, 10 o'clock, 5,000 feet below. I looked down. About 20 Zeros were escorting some D-3A Val dive bombers. Before, I would have felt fear, but now, looking down at those toy-like planes, I felt a hunter's calm. We held the high ground. We held the sword of gravity. "This is Walsh. All units, attention. Maintain formation. Dive attack. Fire and extend immediately. I'll shoot the man myself who slows down to turn. We pushed our noses down. Again, that suffocating acceleration. But this time, it was aggressive, intentional. The wind noise sharpened, air rushing over the wing root intakes, and the oil coolers created a peculiar sound. Not a roar, but a high-frequency, blue-note shriek, like a banshee screaming. Whoo! Oh! This was the sound the Japanese would come to dread. The whistling death. When dozens of F4US dived simultaneously, the sound was like the trumpets of the apocalypse. I locked onto a 0 on the edge of their formation. My speed was nearing 400 knots. He grew rapidly in my gun sight. He seemed to sense something and began a sharp left bank. Too slow. At this speed, I didn't need to turn much. I just made a micro-adjustment, calculating the lead. Range, 300 yards. I squeezed the trigger. The 6 Browning M2 machine guns in the Corsair's wings erupted in unison. It wasn't just shooting, it was sawing. I had a 2-second firing window. In that instant, I saw a sight I will never forget. That 0 didn't smoke, it didn't catch fire, it shattered. Our incendiary armor-piercing rounds tore through its fragile airframe like a chainsaw through wet tissue. The wings snapped, the fuel tank vaporized, and a ball of orange fire blossomed in the sky. I didn't stick around to admire my handiwork. I didn't even confirm the kill. Riding the massive kinetic energy of the dive, I hauled back on the stick. The G-force crushed me, making stars dance in my vision, but my Corsair shot upward like a blue arrow straight back into the sun. When I looked down from the perch, I saw 3 more zeros exploding. The ones trying to chase us up hung in the air like kites with cut strings, their energy spent, sitting ducks for our wingmen. Cheers erupted over the radio. I got him. Did you see that fireball? Damn, this bird can fly. That day, we splashed several zeros and lost none of our own. When we taxied back, the ground crew ran out to meet us. I slid the canopy back. The tropical heat rushed in, but I felt cool, exhilarated. I looked at the powder burns on the wings and patted the side of the massive machine. It wasn't a clumsy, ugly beast anymore. It was a Corsair. More importantly, we began hearing a new emotion in the intercepted Japanese radio traffic. It was the same emotion we had felt in 1942, fear. They started talking about a new enemy plane with strange, bent wings. They said it was fast as lightning and hard as stone. They said when you heard that strange whistle, death had already arrived. This was just the beginning. Kenneth Walsh was on his way to his first Medal of Honor, and far in the rear, an old-timer named Gregory Pappy Boyington was assembling a ragtag group of misfits known as the Black Sheep. The Pacific sky was about to change. In the summer of 1943, the heat in the Solomons was like a wet wool blanket, suffocating. But at 20,000 feet, the cold could freeze the marrow in your bones. If you look at a map, the Solomon Islands look like 2 parallel chains sandwiching a long strip of water. We called it New Georgia Sound, or more commonly, the Slot. It was the busiest, deadliest waterway on Earth. Every day, the Tokyo Express, Japanese destroyer convoys, tried to run supplies to Guadalcanal and Munda. Our job was to send anything with a rising sun flag that dared appear in that sky or on that sea to the bottom. By this time, the F4U Corsair was no longer a novelty. It had become our second skin. I grew used to the plane's temperament. It wasn't gentle like the Wildcat, nor finicky like the Army's P-38. The F4U was like a bull with a violent streak. The cockpit always smelled of hydraulic fluid and high-octane gas, the perfume of combat. Our tactics had matured. Walsh's hit and run was now standard operating procedure. But more importantly, we discovered the plane was unbelievably tough. Once over the Russell Islands, my wingman Tex got chewed up by 3 zeros. In an F4F, he would have been dead. But I watched 20mm shells slam into his wing and rear fuselage. The skin shredded, flapping in the wind like rags. Half his right flap was blown clean off. "Tex, bail out! Get out!" I yelled over the radio, straining my own wings to cut inside and help him. "Screw that, skipper. This baby's still flying." Tex's voice sounded terrified but exhilarated. He wasn't lying. That sieve of a Corsair roared on, holding its course. He even used his remaining guns to blow the fuel tank off one of the Zeros. When he finally wobbled onto the runway for a crash landing, the crew chief counted over 100 bullet holes. If that were a Zero, it would be a pile of matchsticks. The maintenance chief marveled, chewing his tobacco as he patted the shredded vertical stabilizer. That durability gave us a confidence we'd never had. We were no longer cautious prey. We were armored berserkers. If the F4U was a sword, Kenneth Walsh was the master swordsman who sharpened it to a razor's edge. By August 1943, Walsh was the soul of VMF 124. He didn't fly on instinct like some natural geniuses. He was a tactician, a calculating machine. He knew every bolt of the plane, knew the power curve of the R2800 at every altitude. On August 30th, something happened that still seems impossible to me, decades later. It wasn't just a dogfight. It was the ultimate demonstration of the F4U's performance. Our mission was to cover bombers hitting Kahili. It was the biggest Japanese hornet's nest in the region. Shortly after takeoff, Walsh's engine developed a glitch. Anyone else would have turned back for a cold beer. Not Walsh. He made an emergency landing at Munda, swapped into a spare plane, throttled up, and flew like a madman, alone, to catch the formation. When he arrived over Bougainville, the gates of hell were open. Our bombers were surrounded by about 50 Zeros. 50. The sky was thick with silver flies. Our fighter escort was low on fuel and had to turn back, leaving only a handful. I was on the edge of the zone, trying to shake two stubborn bandits, the radio filled with chaotic screaming. "There's too many. We need support." Then I saw it. Kenneth Walsh, in that lone Corsair, dove straight into the swarm of 50 Zeros. It looked like suicide. But I quickly realized it wasn't suicide. It was a slaughter. Walsh used the sheer speed of the F4U to thread the needle through the enemy formation. He never stayed in one spot for more than 3 seconds. Dive, fire, pull up, dive again, fire again, pull up again. His movements were terrifyingly fluid. Every time he dove, 4 or 6.50 calibers roared, followed by a Zero trailing black smoke. He was a wolf charging into a flock of sheep. Only the sheep had guns. The Japanese pilots were clearly bewildered by this crazed blue plane. They tried to surround him, tried to lure him into a slow turn. Walsh didn't bite. He held the high ground, exploiting his energy advantage to the absolute limit. In that melee, he single-handedly shot down 4 Zeros, bringing his daily total to 4 and skyrocketing his score. But he wasn't invincible. I saw his plane take hit after hit. His wings were Swiss cheese, and a 20mm shell shattered his canopy, the glass shrapnel slashing his face. Yet he kept fighting until he had driven off every Zero threatening the bombers. When that battered Corsair finally ditched in the ocean off Vella La Vella, we all thought he was dead. But the tough bastard swam out. He later received the Medal of Honor. What he said at the ceremony was simple, but it's etched in my mind. In this war, it's kill or be killed. In a Corsair, if you die, it's usually your own fault, not the plane's. He was right. Walsh proved that used correctly, the Corsair could take on any number of enemies. If Walsh taught us to fight like scientists, Gregory "Pappy" Boyington taught us to live and fight like pirates. In September 1943, VMF 214 was reorganized. The unit became world famous later, but at the time, they were a pack of unwanted strays. Reserves, troublemakers kicked out of other units, guys with disciplinary records for fighting. And their leader was Boyington. I first met him at the officers' club on Espiritu Santo. He looked much older than us. He was only 30, but to us 20-year-olds, he was Gramps, wearing a white scarf and holding a drink of rot-gut whiskey. He'd been a flying tiger in China before the Marines took him back, which gave him a mystical, mercenary aura. I hear you boys think the F4U is hard to fly? He hopped onto a table, his voice raspy. This plane isn't a nanny, it's a killing tool. If you want to live, stop treating it like a lady. Boyington wasn't just a drunk and a wrestler, he was an air combat genius. He injected VMF 214, the black sheep, with a ferocious aggression. His motto was simple: if you see a Jap in the sky, don't wait for orders. Gut him. The black sheep's tactics were wilder. Boyington played the Corsair's firepower to the hilt. He didn't calculate energy as rigidly as Walsh. He preferred to drag the enemy into a brawl and let his experience and the F4U's brutal 6 guns settle the argument. I remember a joint op in October. We were intercepted over Kahili. Boyington laughed over the radio. "All right, boys, chow time." He invented an incredibly arrogant tactic. He would circle over the Japanese airfield and taunt them on the open radio frequency. "Major Tojo, come on up, we're waiting for you. Are all your zeros rusty?" This humiliation was unbearable for the honor-bound Japanese pilots. They would swarm up from the runway like angry wasps, and that was exactly what Boyington wanted. The Zero is most vulnerable during the climb, slow, with no altitude. The black sheep, circling at 20,000 feet, dropped their Corsairs like anvils on heads. It was a one-sided massacre. I watched Zeros turned into torches at the end of the runway before they could even retract their landing gear. The scream of the Corsair's massive prop in a dive, mixed with the dull thudding of .50 calibers, was the day's melody. Boyington downed 3 that day. He didn't fly gracefully, sometimes it looked downright rough, but he always put the bullets in the cockpit. Back at base, he told us in the briefing room, "See? That's how you use a Corsair. If you're mean enough, the Japs will fear you. Most of their pilots are rookies now. You show them those bent wings, and they piss their pants before the fight even starts." By the end of 1943, the F4U had completely changed the shape of the war. We were no longer defending, we were hunting. The target was the Japanese heart of the South Pacific, Rabaul. By this stage, the quality of Japanese pilots began to plummet. Midway and Guadalcanal had consumed their elite Sea Eagles. Now, the men in the Zero cockpits were often kids with less than 100 flight hours. And us? We were flying machines with 2,000 horsepower, capable of pulling extreme Gs, equipped with radar and new radios. It wasn't a fair duel anymore, it was industrial crushing. We read the despair in intercepted Japanese diaries. One belonged to a pilot named Jiro Tanaka. The intelligence boys translated it. One passage stuck with me. November 14th, clear. Today we met those damned long noses again. Before we saw them, we heard it. That sound like a ghost wailing. The captain says it is just the air over their radiator, but to me, it sounds like death whistling. Sato-kun tried to dogfight them, but the moment he turned, the blue monster was already on top of him. Too fast. It is simply too fast. Our Zero's agility means nothing against their absolute speed. They don't dignify us with a dance. They just dive, shoot, and vanish into the clouds, like lightning. I saw Sato-kun's plane turn to confetti. I didn't even see the enemy's face. How long can Bushido sustain us against such monsters? Whistling Death. The name spread through the Japanese ranks. At first, we thought it was just a figure of speech, until one day, a captured Japanese pilot fell out of his chair in the interrogation room, shaking in terror, just hearing an F4U do a low pass over the building. It was a total psychological break. During this time, another legend, Robert Hansen, the butcher of Rabaul, began his killing spree. Hansen was a black sheep, but he was even more radical than Boyington. He didn't just shoot down planes, he loved strafing the ground. The F4U could carry bombs and rockets, but in Hansen's hands, those 6 guns were the best broom in the world. Once, in the Bougainville Strait, Hansen flew solo toward a Japanese flak battery. Usually that's forbidden. Flak is a fighter pilot's natural predator. He didn't care. He flew his Corsair on the deck, so low the prop spray washed his windshield. He pulled up 200 yards from the gun pit, and his 6 machine guns swept across it like a scythe. I saw the Japanese gunners turned into red mist by the heavy slugs. The battery went silent instantly. "Hey, Red Dog," Hansen drawled lazily over the radio. "I see some barges down there. Gonna go help 'em lose some weight." Hansen shot down 25 planes in just a few months. His style perfectly illustrated the F4U's potential as a fighter bomber. It was thick-skinned, heavily armed. It could clear the skies and then tear up the earth. However, the fall of a hero is always sudden. In February 1944, just as Hansen was poised to break every record, he vanished on a ground attack mission. No one saw a dogfight, maybe a lucky flak shell, maybe a mechanical failure. That blue Corsair took a top ace and disappeared forever beneath the Pacific waves. Hansen's death sobered us. We had absolute superiority, but it was still war. The Grim Reaper didn't play favorites. He just switched to a faster scythe. But undeniably, by early 1944, the skies over Rabaul were swept clean. The fortress that once terrified us was now our target practice range. The once mighty Zero, upon seeing the Death with the bent wings, had only one choice: run, if it could. And far away in the Central Pacific, a bigger storm was brewing. The Navy's fast carrier fleet was pushing forward, and the F4U was about to face its final challenge, proving it belonged not just in the marine mud, but on the swaying decks of the Navy, because by then, a madness called kamikaze was about to turn the Pacific into true hell. In early 1944, while we were pounding the Japanese in the Solomons, an embarrassing fact remained. For a naval fighter, the F4U was still flying mostly from land. Those shiny Essex-class carriers were still packed with F6F Hellcats. The Hellcat was a good plane, like a dutiful farm girl, reliable, easy to fly, easy to land. But we all knew that in raw performance, she couldn't hold a candle to the temperamental Corsair. The brass finally caved, thanks to the British Royal Navy. The Brits invented a new landing technique, the curved approach. Since the Corsair's long nose blocked the forward view, you didn't fly straight in. You kept the plane in a continuous turn, looking out the side at the deck, leveling out only at the last second. In late 1944, as part of the first carrier-based Corsair wing, I stepped aboard the USS Bunker Hill. Landing an F4U on a carrier for the first time felt like walking a tightrope on a cliff edge. I dipped the left wing, the carrier deck looking like a floating postage stamp out my side window. The LSO, landing signal officer, waved his paddles. I had to control this 2,000 horsepower beast with precision. A hair too much throttle, and you float. A hair too little, and you drop like a brick. Cut. I chopped the throttle the instant I saw the signal. The famous Corsair bounce didn't happen. The engineers had finally fixed the landing gear struts to eliminate the rebound. Bam! The tailhook snagged the third wire. Inertia slammed the harness into my chest, but I wanted to laugh out loud. We were back. The blue ocean truly belonged to the Corsair now. Being on carriers meant we had longer legs, a wider reach. We were no longer island-defending hunters. We were the tip of the spear. The F4U-1D model became common, capable of carrying 2 1,000-pound bombs or 8 5-inch rockets. We became fighter bombers. It was a terrifying term. It meant we could sweep the enemy from the sky, then blow their ships to pieces. April 1945, Okinawa. Ask any veteran of Okinawa, and their eyes go dim. That wasn't a battlefield. It was a slaughterhouse. The Japanese knew they had lost, but they wouldn't surrender. They wanted to drag us into hell with them. So, the kamikaze came. For us fighter pilots, the nature of the war changed completely. Before, it was man against man. We fought aces with high skill. It was brutal, but it had a certain chivalry to it. Now we were fighting an ideology, a fanatical death cult. The kamikazes flew Zeros, Val dive bombers, even trainers strapped with explosives, charging our fleet like possessed zombies. They didn't evade, they didn't dogfight. Their eyes were fixed only on the decks of our ships. In this era, the F4U became the fleet's only savior. Why? Speed. When a Zero loaded with explosives dove from the clouds at a radar picket ship, an F6F Hellcat often couldn't catch it. But a Corsair could. It was April 16th, Operation Kikusui No. 3. The sky was full of suicide planes. I was flying a brand new F4U. This was the pinnacle of the Corsair lineage, fitted with the R280018W engine and a 4-bladed prop. With water injection engaged, it pushed 2,450 horsepower. It was as fast as a rocket with wings. Red Dog, Vector 090, 10 miles low, 2 Judies heading for the Laffy. I didn't even check the fuel gauge. I slammed the throttle and engaged the water methanol injection. The engine let out a violent roar. Blue flames spitting from the exhaust stacks. The G-force slammed me back harder than ever before. The airspeed indicator whipped past 400 knots. Those 2 Judy dive bombers were fast, but against the F4U, they looked like they were standing still. This was why we existed, to intercept death. I closed on the first Judy's high 6. I could see the Japanese pilot in the cockpit, a white headband tied around his forehead. He ignored me completely, staring dead ahead at the destroyer below. "Not today, you bastard." I squeezed the trigger. The F4U4's 6 M2s had a higher rate of fire. The dense wall of lead sawed his tail off instantly. The plane tumbled like a stone into the sea, throwing up a massive geyser, but the second one was still charging. He was less than a kilometer from the USS Laffy. The destroyer's AA guns were firing frantically, the sky filled with black puffs. I had no shooting angle. If I fired, I might hit the ship. I had to fly faster than him, cut between him and the ship, or I did something crazy. Using the Corsair's superior roll rate, I sliced in from the side, getting terrifyingly close. It was a fraction of a second. I shredded the suicide plane into debris. The shockwave of his explosion rocked my plane violently, splattering oil and parts across my windshield. Watching that fireball hit the water, I felt no triumph, just deep exhaustion and nausea. This wasn't air combat anymore. It was pest control against madmen trying to kill themselves. That night, landing on the carrier, walking to the edge of the deck to light a cigarette, you could smell the char on the wind. It was the smell of burning destroyers and hundreds of dead sailors miles away. Without the high-speed interception of the F4U, the casualty list would have been 10 times longer. Marine and Navy pilots flying these bent-wing birds wove a big blue blanket over the fleet. We were the last line of defense. While the kamikazes grabbed the headlines, the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service wasn't quite dead in the final months. They pulled out their last trump card, the Kawanishi N1K2J, Shiden Kai, George. It was June 1945, a sweep over Kyushu. We were always told Japanese planes were fragile lighters, but that day we hit a stone wall. Heads up, 3 o'clock, 4 bandits. Don't look like Zeros. They had thick fuselages and rounded wings, painted in dark green camouflage, only the blood-red rising sun standing out. It was the 343rd Kokutai, the Sword Squadron. Japan had gathered all its surviving aces into this elite unit. The fight was ferocious. The Shidenkai was a great plane. Its automatic combat flaps gave it incredible maneuverability, and its 420mm cannons hit like sledgehammers. But I wasn't afraid, because I was holding the reins of an F4U4. We entered a dogfight, usually forbidden, but by the end of the war, us old birds could make the Corsair dance. The Corsair had a little-known trick. We could drop the flaps a few degrees in a fight. It added drag, but those massive inverted gull wings provided extra lift, letting us bite into the turn with a tighter radius. The Japanese pilot was a master. He pulled a beautiful vertical maneuver, trying to reverse onto my tail. In an old F4F or an early F4U1, I would have been in trouble. But the F4U4 had endless power. I firewalled the throttle and went vertical. The massive four-bladed prop drilled through the air. I watched him stall out in the face of gravity, while my warbird kept roaring upward. This was the power of American industry. This was technological domination. Even if you are the emperor's finest samurai, even if you have a will of steel against absolute horsepower and technology, you can only swallow defeat. I leveled out at the apex and hammered over. Now, I was the hunter, and he was the exhausted bird. He struggled in my sights, trying a final evasion. My 6 guns roared in unison. There was no dramatic fireball, just the sad sound of machinery shattering. The Shidenkai, representing the pinnacle of Japanese aviation, trailed black smoke and spiraled down toward its ruined homeland. Over the radio, I heard my wingmen cheering. Those guys were tough, but not tough enough. That was the swan song of Japanese air power. After that, we met sporadic resistance, but the sky undisputedly belonged to the Stars and Stripes. August 15th, 1945. The news came over the radio. Japan had surrendered. We were patrolling over Tokyo Bay, but I heard no cheers. The radio was strangely silent. I looked down. The once mighty combined fleet was gone, just a few rusted hulks rotting in the harbor. Tokyo had been turned to scorched earth by the B-29 fire raids. I looked at the bombs under my wings, meant for a target down there. Now, they weren't needed. I pulled the F4U, the machine that had been with me through life and death, up through the clouds and into the eternal deep blue high altitude. The R2800 engine still thundered, but to my ears, it was no longer a war cry. It was a requiem. I thought of Kenneth Walsh, the man who taught us how to fight. I thought of Pappy Boyington, the old rogue who had survived 2 years in a POW camp and would be free in a few days. I thought of Robert Hansen, the young genius sleeping at the bottom of the sea, and the hundreds of faces that didn't live to see this day. We won. With steel, fuel, blood, and this strange-looking fighter, we had crushed an empire's ambition. Now, I'm closing this memoir. Historians have given the F4U many accolades. They call it the greatest carrier fighter of World War II. They list the stats: 64,051 sorties flown, 2,140 enemy aircraft destroyed, only 189 losses in air combat, 11-1. A kill ratio that has never been seen before and likely never will be again. But for us old guys, those numbers don't matter. If you ask me, what is the F4U Corsair? I will tell you, it is the mud splattered by those giant tires on Guadalcanal. It is the security of that thick armor when you face 50 enemy planes at 20,000 feet. It is that blue note whistle in a dive that scatters the enemy's soul and sets your blood on fire. The Japanese pilots called it death itself, but in our hearts, it was an angel. A vengeance angel covered in oil and grease, with bent wings and a mouth-breathing fire. To this day, whenever I go to an air show and see a restored F4U fly overhead, pristine and shining, I still instinctively stand at attention and salute, not just for the plane, but for that era that belonged to us, an era gone forever.